What do you make of this development, this Gregory Afoko legal pickle?
Well, it is unfortunate that he was granted bail and he was not able to enjoy the grant of bail, notwithstanding, I am informed the fulfillment of the conditions of the bail. It's really unfortunate. I think that we must clearly separate the two issues: the grant of bail, fulfillment of conditions, and what happened and who did what, as opposed to what happened in court, I think, 2 days ago. I think we must separate the two issues and not get them twisted.
Mm.
Because my information is that he was granted bail. His family people satisfy the conditions of bail. However, the state actors did not let him enjoy his freedom. That is clearly wrong. That is clearly wrong and unconstitutional. However, the bit about the fresh charges which were put before the court and the arguments for bail is a separate issue. I do not believe for a moment that at the time that Mr. Afoko was put before the court in the fresh matter, the court was called upon to consider the existing bill. I don't think that the judge would have even had the jurisdiction to do that, because my information is that fresh charges were brought and a fresh matter was put before the court. So once we separate the two, we will see where the infraction was. The judge exercised her discretion not to grant bail in the fresh matter. I believe that Mr. Afoko is represented by competent lawyers. If the judge has exercised her discretion wrongly, I'm not the one to teach the lawyers what to do. Indeed, when the state was dissatisfied in the first grant of bail, the state appealed. Now, if you look at what the Supreme Court judge said about the use of nolle prosequi, there is clearly that view that I take, that yes, the state actors with the state power behind them entered the nolle prosequi after the trial on certain grounds and decided to file fresh charges. That procedure is something which has been in our criminal jurisprudence for a long time, and I do not think that it is only about Mr. Gregory Afoko. I think it is an institutional manipulation which ought to be looked at compendiously. It is something that has been in our system for a long time. I have not been doing criminal law for a long time, but I knew that some time ago persons will be granted bail. You get the state putting in a nolle prosequi. The person gets out of court and he's rearrested on fresh charges. This has been something that has been going on for a long time, and I think it is time that we looked at that way of handling our criminal jurisprudence. For example, people go through trial up to a point and a nolle prosequi is entered. By the law, the state ought not explain why it has entered a nolle prosequi. So you see that Justice Boamang said that it is time that when that discretionary power is used, at least the public should be made to understand why it was used, so that when it turns out that that power which has been used has been abused by a subsequent arrest, we all know what is happening. In this case, there has been a lot of noise about the judge doing this or doing that. Unfortunately, I am not of that school of thought which will seek to deprecate the judiciary when we all say that the judiciary is our last hope and bastion for the protection of the rule of law. So we ought to be careful about how we say these things and how we try to implicate the executive being in bed with the judiciary. Let us all deal with these issues with a calm head and let us deal with it as lawyers.
Mr. Forson, If, as you say, Nolly Prosequa is subject to abuse, should a critical group like the Ghana Bar Association not do something about it?
It is a very interesting question. You see, the law itself has given somebody a certain discretionary power. For example, the power of the president to fire ministers. The president is not obliged to give reasons, but good governance suggests that just as when the president is appointing somebody, the person's credentials are put forward. In the same vein, if the person is being fired, the reason for the use of that discretionary power ought to be explained. So I think it is time that we all start thinking about how these powers are exercised. It is not about one person, it is about how the institutions of state use the power. For example, I have read somewhere that when a person is granted bail, it is the police who are the agents of the state who have to confirm or deny the justification without the registrar of the court supervising this activity. If it is correct, then it is wrong. These are things that we ought to look at the institutional level, not at the personal level. So yes, I agree that the Bar Association needs to say something about it, but I think that a lot has been said. For example, I believe that Mr. Afoko is represented by lawyers. These lawyers hold the IGP for contempt, and I think that is the right thing to do. And I think they should pursue all the state agencies who have acted to deny him of his constitutional rights, and punishment be exacted. If it is found that the police acted unconstitutionally and wrongly, he needs to be compensated. And as has been indicated in the Occupy Ghana statement, those persons ought to be punished personally. Because you see, unfortunately, those persons' actions give Ghana a very bad image. Those persons' actions make people think that the judiciary, whose independence is guaranteed in the Constitution, is in bed with the executive without any proof.
Now, when you were speaking earlier about the Bar Association having to say something, it reminded me of this argument that has been made in the past few days about how the Bar Association has been accused of not commenting in a clear violation on the clear violation of the rights of a citizen by the state actors. Do you think there is merit in these criticisms?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
I'm saying that some persons have criticized the Bar Association of not speaking up on this Gregory Afoko bail matter. I'm speaking of the March 14 bail that was granted, which terms were not honored by government. Will it be right to say that, to criticize the Bar Association in this matter?
Oh, well, I mean, criticism is not necessarily a bad thing. It is not necessarily a bad thing. But yes, it was brought to my attention, and in my investigations proved that his lawyers were on the ball. And I do not think that, you see, the Bar Association must be jumping into matters which are before the courts. That is why we're careful about jumping into the matter. His lawyers were dealing with the issue. The matter was on appeal. And I am very careful about, trying to stampede the court into acting one way or the other. The court had given its orders. And the actors were not complying with the court's orders. Now, when somebody is not complying with the court's order, I know that the lawyers should know exactly what to do, irrespective of who is involved, because all persons, from the president to the last man, are subject to the rule of law. Nobody is above the law. Everybody's powers which he exercises in this country have been clearly delineated in the Constitution. Therefore, if somebody has been given an order by a court of competent jurisdiction and he is not complying, the lawyers ought to know what to do.
Of course, and contempt charges have been filed against the IGP in this matter.
If a person is not represented, that is a different matter. But where the person is represented by competent lawyers, I do not see why those people should not be able to apply the law as it is. That is where I have a little challenge.
Mm.
Because then what you would be advocating is that where a matter is before the court, the bar association must be standing on alert to see whether or not justice has been done in any individual case. I do not think that we even have that manpower or competence to do that. So
But in
that
the
is why
case of the
we've been cautious.
SA3, Mr. Forson, where some three South African security officials were subjected to the very same treatments that Gregory Afoko was, the Bar Association was loud. A statement was issued, and the circumstances were not different.
Yes. So the Bar Association has not given a statement.
In this case, that's the question that has been raised.
And therefore, what is the conclusion that you are trying to infer?
I'm asking why.
Well, because I was of the view that the matter was playing out in court. That's it. So long as the matter is being played out in court. You see, I find it a bit objectionable. When the state lost its appeal, was the Bar Association supposed to speak against the loss of the appeal? No. Because I thought that the matter is playing out in court. So long as the matter is playing out in court and everybody has access to justice, I find it difficult to understand why people to think that we ought to stampede the process. Yes, somebody's view about the silence is always welcome. Remember that this whole thing is fraught with a lot of all kinds of undercurrents, and we are careful to ensure that justice is done. I am of no doubt, I have no doubt in my mind, that between March and when he was put before the court again, injustice has been done to him. Now, if injustice has been done to him and so he's represented by competent lawyers, I believe that they ought to know what to do.
Well, the argument again from lawyers is that there was a legal process going on in the SA3 case. They had lawyers then. But can you confirm for us that Gregory Afoko's family petitioned the GVA?
I have not seen any petition of that sort. I saw a petition by the from, I think it's the Catholic something, the Catholic Council, something like that. I think a petition was sent to the Catholic Council, some name, but it has to do with the Catholic Church, and they forwarded their concerns to us. But the family has not petitioned directly. No.
So what did the GBA do about this petition?
That was we're copied. We're copied. We were not petitioning directly. We were copied in a petition.
And you didn't find it expedient to act?
Now, you don't know the contents of that petition. So why do you ask whether we didn't find it expedient to act?
Well, it means the matter was brought to your attention, no?
Yes, a matter can be brought to your attention, but it will not be requesting your direct intervention.
Right.
A matter can be brought to your attention by way of information.
Right.
And I've told you already that because the matter was playing out in court, we were worried about trying to stampede the court process. And especially because I knew that the man was represented by lawyers. I expected the lawyers to take the state actors to task.
Well, like I said earlier, they are, which is why the IGP is facing a contempt charge. They will go back to court on the 22nd of July.
Yes, so the state actors who have denied him bail, after a court of competent jurisdiction has done so, they must be taken to task.
Now, the state's application for stay of execution was refused, and yet Mr. Afoko was still detained.
Yes, and I've told you clearly that between that time and the time the High Court was constituted to try the case, that ought to be dealt with. Now, that is not the province of the Ghana Bar Association. That ought to be dealt with. It is a matter which, if found to be correct, people must be punished. The laws of Ghana work. They should be seen to be working.
So you would agree that people must be punished in this case if indeed the facts hold as they are?
Without a doubt in my mind. And it has been stated. If it has been stated, why repeat it? It has been stated clearly. And I believe that the lawyers ought to know what to do.
Thank you very much,
because
Mr.
You see, the impression must not be created as if the courts are not doing what they ought to do. Because if you read what the Supreme Court said about even the use of the non-late prosecutor, it is clear that whatever that concerns the people, the Supreme Court as a policy-making court has tried to deal with it. And if there has been abuse, point out the abuse and expose it. If there's institutional failure, point out the institutional failure by the relevant evidence and let us all deal with it. Because you see, it shouldn't be that in an isolated case, you are looking at one person's access to relief. There are so many people who I'm sure are in a similar situation. So let us expose this canker of people being granted bail by the courts and esteeming use of the institutional failures to deny people of their freedoms. It is time that we look at it and deal with it.
Great. You point at institutional failure, or you allude to it at a point, but Mr. Forson, who would you say is directly liable for this unconstitutional detention of Gregory Afoko? Or is
that must be the result of careful investigation, because I cannot see, as I sit here, I cannot see who is. The court granted an order. That is a fact. That order had to be carried out by certain persons. Who were the persons who were charged with that responsibility? What did they do, or what did they fail to do? So that must be investigated, and whoever is found culpable must be exposed and dealt with.
Without saying who, would you suspect there's an unseen...
No, I will not deal with the area of suspicions and speculations. It must be investigated that when the order was drawn up, who were charged with the responsibility of assessing the justification, etc., etc. There were persons who were given that responsibility. Now, when those people went through the process, the recommendations which were given, the justification, was it enough? Was it, if it was, who was in charge of releasing the person? These are processes that an investigation will clearly bring out. So that is what I think we ought to do, rather than, throw aspersions in the air. Let's follow the process. And I believe that those who are giving those orders are people who live with us. So let's investigate them, smoke out those people, and shame them.
Tony Forson, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome, sir.
That's the president of the Ghana Bar Association, Tony Forson, speaking to us on the Super Morning Show.
Maybe today I don't get nothing.
So, we began this conversation by saying there are two separate issues. Gregory Afoko was refused bail 2 days ago on a fresh charge brought against him. But on the 14th of March, he was granted bail by the High Court. He was never released. His lawyers say he didn't enjoy a minute of freedom. So we just spoke to Mr. Forson about the second matter that I spoke to you about. He says that it seems there's an abuse of this non-late prosecutor rule there, it seems. And the persons who did not release Gregory Afoko, or who's superintendent over his unlawful detention, should definitely be punished after an investigation is carried out. 20 minutes past 7 on your Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. So much more coming up. The Fidelity Bank Set Yourself Free promo is getting more and more exciting. The first two lucky winners, Alfred Atajimai of Edum Main Branch and Charles Opon of Swami Main Branch, have each received their iPhone X. You could be the next winner. Perform accounts to wallet transfers, airtime top-ups, instant interbank transfer, utility bill payments, all from the Fidelity mobile banking app. Remember,